So let's talk briefly about the criminal cases against Donald Trump. There are 4 of them. So what's going to happen with all of those cases? Well, the 2 federal cases are going to go bye-bye. Jack Smith is figuring out how exactly to wrap those cases up, but they're going to be dismissed. And the question, I think, is going to be whether or not Jack Smith is going to write a report and put all of the evidence into a special counsel report before he leaves office. I hope that's what happens, but we'll have to see. But the cases are going to be dismissed. Now, it's theoretically possible that those cases can be refiled and Donald Trump could be reindicted and put on trial after he leaves office in 4 years. But that would depend upon a couple of things. First of all, the statute of limitations. Honestly, I haven't bothered to look up the statute of limitations for the crimes with which he has been charged. But if the statute of limitations has not run on those charges by the time he leaves office, then he theoretically could be indicted again. But another thing to consider is whether or not Donald Trump pardons himself for those crimes once he takes office. Now, that wouldn't prevent him from being indicted if a Democrat wins in 2028 and wants to pursue charges against Donald Trump. He could still be indicted, but then once the case gets to court, Donald Trump would file a motion to dismiss on the basis that he had pardoned himself. Then we would have a legal fight over whether or not it is constitutional for a president to pardon himself. I am of the belief that it is not constitutional and that a self-pardon has no legal effect, but we'll have to see. And, given the corruption of this current Supreme Court, I wouldn't hold my breath. But honestly, I doubt that it would ever get there. Even if the statute of limitations has not run and Donald Trump does not pardon himself, I don't know. If a Democrat wins in 2028, who would that Democrat be? And would they even want to bother with Donald Trump anymore? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. So these cases are probably gone for all time. I hope not, but probably. Then we have the state cases. First in Georgia. That case is currently on hold pending an appeal over Fani Willis and whether or not there was prosecutorial misconduct. Now, Trump is not going to be put on trial in that case. He can't pardon himself. But since he is going to be president in a couple of months, he's not going to be put on trial. The question is whether or not the charges against Trump there are going to be dismissed entirely or whether everything as relates to Donald Trump is just put on hold until after he leaves office. This isn't the fact that he got elected is not necessarily a get out of jail forever free card in that case. This doesn't necessarily wipe away those state charges. But honestly, I don't know how the judge is going to handle that case, how the prosecution is going to seek to handle that case. So we'll just have to wait and see. Keep in mind also that there are a whole bunch of co-defendants, Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani, and others in that case. And there's no reason that the cases against them cannot proceed, assuming the case survives the appeal that is currently under consideration. But as to Trump, that case is at least put on hold for 4 years, if ever it gets back on track against Donald Trump. That brings us to the New York case in which Donald Trump is already a convicted felon. Now, he has a motion to dismiss that case on file on the basis of the Supreme Court's recent immunity decision. He's saying that decision requires that the charges against him be dismissed. Now, Judge Merchan was going to rule on that yesterday, I believe, but that has been put on hold. The District Attorney Alvin Bragg has asked for more time for their office to consider how to proceed here. So we're still going to have to wait and see what the judge rules on his motion to dismiss on immunity grounds. I don't expect the judge to dismiss it. It's actually pretty absurd. All of the conduct, the crime occurred before he was president, and so the immunity decision does not apply to that crime. The only thing under consideration there that could be affected by the Supreme Court's immunity decision is a conversation he had with Hope Hicks, one of his aides, and she testified at his trial about a conversation they had. Now, is that grounds for dismissing the case? No, it's not grounds for dismissing it because, again, he's not immune. These crimes took place before he was president. The question, so I think the judge will deny that motion to dismiss. The question is whether or not the fact that Hope Hicks testified about conversations and she, an aide, had with the president while he was president, whether that is grounds for a new trial. Because if that conversation is protected by immunity, then it should not have been admitted at trial. Now, we didn't have the Supreme Court's decision at the time of the trial, so the judge didn't make a mistake at the time. But in retrospect, now that we have that opinion, that conversation potentially should not have been admitted to trial. The question is whether or not that is harmless error. Is the terminology that they use. Because basically this happens. Trials are not perfect. There's always mistakes of some kind or another, evidentiary, procedural, or otherwise. And so you don't upend a conviction and start from scratch and have a new trial every time there was some error in the case. The question is how big the error was. Was it a harmless error that it really didn't harm the defendant in any way, prejudice his rights, prevent him from getting a fair trial? Or was the error so great that it prevented the defendant from getting a fair trial? That's the question. And if it was so great, the case isn't dismissed. The conviction is just set aside and a new trial is ordered. So that's why it would be a motion for a new trial would be granted in that case. So that's the question here. With the Hope Hicks testimony, how bad was this error in letting in her conversation? Now, I don't think it was very harmful at all because what she testified about was also testified to by lots of other people in conversations that are not protected by this immunity decision. So even if just because you admitted her testimony, it's just one of several people saying the exact same thing. So the judge would probably, in my opinion, my guess, probably rule that it was harmless error and deny the motion for new trial. But I honestly don't know what this judge is going to do. I don't know Judge Merchan. I've never practiced in his court. I don't even practice in New York. So I don't know what he's going to do. Maybe he just dismisses it altogether and just says, well, he's going to be president now, I'm going to dismiss it. I sure as hell hope not, because the law does not compel that outcome. The law does not entitle him to have this case dismissed because he's going to be president. That's not a thing. Getting yourself elected is not a legal reason to set aside a conviction. So let's hope that doesn't happen. It's certainly... Anyway, so I hope he doesn't do that. What I think he should do, I don't know if he will, but to me, if you're really going to follow the law, the no-brainer thing to do here is deny his motion to dismiss because it's absurd. Deny his motion for a new trial because it was harmless error. The Hope Hicks testimony was harmless error. And then that leaves you with the question of sentencing. He's been convicted. A jury found him guilty. So what do we do now? Do we sentence him? And what do I sentence him to? Now, what he sentences him to, I don't know. It could be anywhere from probation to prison time. There's lots of reasons. He's a first-time offender in terms of criminal convictions. He's not been convicted before. That is one thing in his favor, but there's lots of other things that argue for prison time. The seriousness of this case, the fact that he had no respect for the court. He was held in contempt many times. He threatened the judge, threatened court staff, threatened witnesses. All of these things can be considered, and those things would argue strongly in favor of prison. Would he give him prison? I don't know. I would give him prison, and this is what I would do if I were the judge. Sentence him to prison, but then just stay the execution of the sentence until such time as he leaves office. Because you can't imprison the president when he's a sitting president. That's not going to fly. And it's not feasible to imprison the president in the couple of months during the transition when he's preparing to take office. That's not responsible. So I think what should be done is sentence him to whatever the sentence is. If he wants to give him probation, whatever, that's up to him. I would give him prison. And even if he gives him probation, you don't put a sitting president on probation. Because the thing about probation is, what the court says is, I'm not going to send you to prison as long as you behave while you're on probation. Well, what happens if he violates the conditions of his probation? Is the judge going to then put him in prison, even though he's the sitting president? No. So probation is meaningless unless you can revoke the probation if the person violates the conditions and then sentences him to prison for violating probation. If revoking someone's probation and sending them to prison is not a possibility because they're the sitting president, then probation is meaningless. There's nothing hanging over the defendant's head. So what I would do is sentence him. I would sentence him to prison and then just stay the sentence and say this imposition or execution of this sentence will be stayed until such time as defendant Trump is no longer holding the office of President of the United States. That's it. So as soon as he leaves office, he reports to prison. That's how this should work. Or, he's given some period of time after leaving office and then needs to report to prison. That's how I think he should handle it. How he's going to handle it, I have no idea. But that's legally what I think should happen. We'll just have to wait and see. But this whole thing just makes me sick to see this man get away with his crimes. But that's where we are. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Follow me on Facebook. And I'll talk to you again soon.